Hello everyone, it's me, Sensu Ramsey. I would like to sincerely give honor to our men and women in the armed forces who have sacrificed their lives for our freedom. Words are not enough to express my gratitude I hold in my heart for our veterans. Today is the day for us to say thank you, veterans. And I want to share with you a short film that I received from a good friend of mine, Raymond Canilo, the son of Sergeant Fidel Zunimo Canilo, a World War II veteran. The film is about Comrades in Arms, the American Cemetery. It is the largest American overseas military which is located in Fort Bonifacio, Taguig, Metro Manila. Stay tuned.
They came from far away and right next door. They left behind their families, their schools, their jobs, and their hometowns to become soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, and set sail for distant battlefields.
Everyone was committed, and everyone felt that they were in an effort that had to succeed or the country would no longer exist.
I wanted to show them that, hey, I love America. I'll fight for America.
They would find themselves in some of the most brutal fighting the world would ever see.
I don't know how I survived. I tell you, I don't really know how I survived.
My father told me that movement was survival. If you didn't move, you died. Said he put one foot in front of another, and that was his lifeline.
This is a story of courage, resilience, and sacrifice of those who risked everything.
It's very overwhelming to see all of those names on the wall. Everywhere you look symbolizes loss.
More than 56,000 are honored here, the single largest resting place of American World War II military dead, anywhere in the world. This is not just a tale of loss, but also of freedom, secured by ordinary people who fought an extraordinary fight. The Philippines in the Western Pacific, at a crossroads between East and West. A colony of Spain since 1521, ceded to the United States following the Spanish-American War of 1898. Initially, a scene of conflict between the United States and Filipino nationalists. A Commonwealth in 1935, with a strong U.S. military presence throughout the islands. A tense bond had become a powerful friendship with a promise of independence. But all that history was at risk. War began in China, and then Europe, but soon spread to the Pacific.
December 7, 1941, we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. We were scheduled to play the USS Arizona for a fleet football championship. About 7 minutes of 8, the attack came. You didn't have time to change clothes at all. We thought maybe we'd be in a war, but we didn't figure there that they would attack us because we were so strong.
December 7th, 1941.
Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor plunges America into World War II.
In infamy.
Within 6 hours of Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces begin attacks on Hong Kong, the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, Thailand, Malaya, and Borneo, seizing strategic bases throughout the Pacific.
My older brother, George, was a naval aviator and was assigned to a dive bomber squadron aboard the carrier Bunker Hill. He had a strong desire to get into combat. It was a moment of realization that now we're into it up to our neck.
Philippine Scout, we are all American Army. My father told me, you better join, the war is coming.
After preliminary landings in northern Luzon to capture bases and airfields, the Japanese launched their main assault through the Lingayen Gulf on December 22nd.
We were told that there was going to be small arms and ammunition and a few troops. What we found was 30,000 Japanese troops, flamethrowers, armored vehicles, tanks. We found everything.
They sweep through the island and Manila Falls on January 2nd, 1942. Outgunned American and Filipino troops withdraw into the Bataan Peninsula.
My grandfather, his unit was assigned at the Abukay line. He tried to enter one foxhole, but was directly hit by a bomb. You could just see the arms and the legs of his comrades hanging from the fallen trees.
In March of 1942, General Douglas MacArthur is ordered to leave the defenders of Bataan and Corregidor behind. He promises to return.
Fellows in the army went to Bataan to fight the Japanese. Bataan was where they had their last stand.
Following weeks of bombings and artillery barrages, massive assaults forced the American and Filipino fighters to surrender. For the U.S., it's a shocking loss. The sacrifice will inspire a determination to regain Filipino independence. What comes next will be even worse. For most, the Bataan Death March began on foot at Mariveles.
Number one, we had no food or water. Most of the men were sick. They had malaria, they had dysentery, they had a gunshot wound, they had problems. And then some of the Filipino people started to throw us food. You'd grab whatever you could, and then you'd take a bite and give it to the guy next to you to take a bite.
The guard never let us get any water. I saw one kid, he tried to go to the faucet, and he was killed. Right there, he was killed, just to get some drink.
Upon reaching the train station in San Fernando, some 66 miles to the north, the prisoners were squeezed into World War I boxcars, 100 men or more, in a space meant for 40.
The condition inside that wagon was so horrible that people started to suffocate. In fact, my grandfather was inside that wagon with his cousin. Unfortunately, that cousin of his died inside that wagon.
Thousands of Filipinos and Americans die on the Bataan Death March. Survivors end up in brutal prison camps.
My father reached Camp O'Donnell after deboarding, and the conditions there were so bad. There was only one water spigot for thousands of men, 10,000, 12,000 men.
And the men were dying 40, 50, or 100 a day. They were dying from malaria and dysentery. It was awful. There's no question about it.
Across the Pacific, the situation is bleak. Throughout the beginning months of 1942, one island after another falls to the Japanese. But slowly, the tide of war begins to shift. First, the Doolittle Raid, then the Battle of the Coral Sea. Despite suffering heavy losses, the Allies push back against the Japanese forces. Meanwhile, resistance groups spring up across the Philippines.
Not all the troops surrendered. Some of them lighted out for the mountains or the countryside to become guerrillas.
My dad is with the U.S. Army. He was asked to organize guerrilla movement. I was assigned in the propaganda corps.
When the Filipinos had been let go, they were told to even sign a form saying that I will not join any guerrilla activities. But of course, the great majority of them did continue the fight.
In June 1942, at the Battle of Midway, American naval forces hand the Japanese their first major defeat. Back home, news of the victory at Midway is a huge boost for morale, and the Allies begin their determined advance to reclaim the Pacific and liberate the Philippines. Thousands of Allied military personnel sacrificed their lives to ensure victories at Guadalcanal, in and around New Guinea and elsewhere, just as the Filipinos continue their own fight for freedom. Across the islands, the guerrillas, resupplied by U.S. submarines and parachute drops, make Japanese forces miserable for almost 4 years, spying on and sabotaging Japanese camps and installations.
My great-grandfather, he was confined at the Philippine General Hospital. He just pretended to be sick. Whenever he'd get visitors, they were actually the informants that would carry out his orders or directives for all of the underground activities.
Ed handled 40,000 men on the guerrilla forces. They would blow up bridges, blow up depots. He had no idea if it will become successful or not, or he will die the next day.
Civilians protected the guerrilla troops, often at great risk to themselves.
We just go about like ordinary civilians, doing our work, gathering the intelligence that we were going to send to General MacArthur.
They believed in his mission, which was to turn around, wait for MacArthur, who said, "I will return." And he kept his promise.
In the early hours of October 20th, 1944, an incredible sight. A vast convoy steaming towards the island of Leyte. The three-day naval battle for Leyte Gulf and the successful landings set the stage for the liberation of the Philippines. General MacArthur has kept his promise.
I think a lot of people fear he shall return there and we'll wait for him to come back. In fact, I watched him with binoculars. I watched him when he waded ashore.
The Sixth Army lands on Luzon and battles its way across the island. On February 3rd, 1945, American troops and Filipino guerrillas reached the outskirts of Manila.
Japanese, they occupy schoolhouses. I was assigned on the mortar, and I fire on them and hit them direct.
They fight block by block and house to house. The toll on the civilian population is devastating.
And then one day, at the concentration camp where we were at Fort Santiago, there was practically nothing. No soldiers, no nothing. I was in sleepers. We just left and went home.
Following some of the fiercest urban fighting in the war, General Douglas MacArthur announces the restoration of the Commonwealth of the Philippines. Manila is free, but the war in the Pacific continues. American and Filipino forces face stiff resistance from the Japanese in other parts of the Philippines. Allied offensives across the Pacific leave paths of destruction in their wake. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, thousands of Americans killed and many more wounded. The Japanese losses are far greater. U.S. bombings inflict heavy damage on key Japanese cities. August 6, 1945, the U.S. drops the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, after nearly 4 long and bloody years, Japan surrenders. The war is finally over.
You've probably seen the headlines, the jubilation that took place, what was going on all over the country. It was a tremendous release that we weren't going to lose another several thousand or 100,000 service people in battles in the Pacific.
But amidst the joy, sadness.
I had a younger brother, 16-year-old, who was taken by the Japanese. We never saw him again.
George was shot down on January 1st, 1944. I've never gotten over what he did. never gotten over his dedication. I've never gotten over his sacrifice.
My grandmother did her very best to move on with her life after such a devastating loss. She did remarry, but George was always the love of her life. I don't think she ever got over the loss of him.
Manila, once known as the Pearl of the Orient, is reduced to rubble.
He was there in all the rubble of Manila. He said that amidst all the horrible death, I saw an orchid coming out from the wall. And to me, that was a symbol of life.
Rising from the ashes, a new country. On July 4th, 1946, the Republic of the Philippines is recognized as an independent nation.
It was just like home, just like everything was okay again when the Americans came back. That was the biggest thing. You didn't have to go to sleep and feel like, oh, geez, what's going to happen to me tomorrow?
For America and the Philippines, a special bond is affirmed, a bond forged in the fires of combat.
You know, 84% of the fighting force of Bataan were Filipinos. Only 16% were Americans. So it was the Filipinos doing most of the fighting and most of the dying on Bataan.
What kept Ed alive was the love of the Filipino people. They had that bond. They would give their last piece of chicken to keep him going.
Time I visited the Philippines after the war, as far as I'm concerned, being associated with them, they can associate with us there, and as a result there, you're going to have a better world.
This solemn resting place is a symbol of that bond. Americans and Filipinos gather here to preserve the memory of two nations that fought side by side.
Sacrifices have been made for me to be able to enjoy what I enjoy now, all of the freedoms, all of the privileges, all the luxuries in life that I'm able to enjoy. It's no wonder that they're called the greatest generation.
I consider them all heroes. All these thousands and thousands of men that not only died here, died elsewhere in the Pacific on their way here. It's an unbelievable place to come and see.
And I would love to tell these stories and keep them intact. I'd love to tell them to my children, to my grandchildren, Filipinos and Americans fighting side by side for the same cause.
There's a lot of emotions tied up in Grandpa George's story that comes together when you see his name on the wall.
I actually had a pit in my stomach walking past them, and just wall after wall, thousands of people who all have a story, like my great-grandfather.
Once you get to the wall of the missing and you see your relative's name, it is very emotional. You feel like they've been given a really nice place to be at rest.
The safety of our countries, of our families, of our world is because of the sacrifices that these people made and continue to make.
More than 56,000 men and women of the United States Armed Forces are memorialized here at the Manila American Cemetery. The American Battle Monuments Commission honors their service, their achievements, and their sacrifice. A perpetual reminder of who they were and what they did when freedom hung in the balance.
Again, thank you for tuning in, you guys. Thank you, veterans, for your service, for protecting our country, for your bravery, for your loyalty, and for all that you do to make this country safe. Again, love, peace, and joy. God bless you all. Stay safe. Bye.